So as we discussed last time, there is the distinct possibility that some or most or maybe all dinosaurs were actually endothermic. That is to say what the average person would call warm-blooded, able to regulate their body temperature. Maybe so. If that were true, then they should be found in ancient environments that we would identify as being cold. And yes, indeed, they have been. So there's this place called Dinosaur Cove, which is in the southeastern portion of Australia. You see it on the map there. And if we rotate Australia back to where it was during the Cretaceous time, the age of these deposits, it was clearly within the Antarctic Circle. So it would have been a frigid place. If we look at the rocks themselves, they definitely are a river environment, and the fossils themselves come from transported bone beds. So all of the sort of caveats that I gave before about being able to completely identify and work with dinosaurs are true here as well. So what do we find there? Interestingly enough, there is an Allosaurus, which when I say anachronistic, what that means is that it's kind of out of place. It's not in place as far as time is concerned. All other allosaurs were in the Jurassic, but this one, here it is. Another thing is that most of these allosaurs are much shorter. Over half of their expected height is gone, so only about 2 meters tall. Here's an interesting group called the Muttaburrasaurus. It's a hadrosaur, so a duckbill type thing. Again, smaller than what we would have at North America at the same time. Tamimus is a Saurischia theropod, so a carnivorous dinosaur. Again, it's dwarfed. I think you should be seeing a pattern here. These organisms exist in this colder environment, but they're smaller. And then there is an actual ankylosaur. It hasn't been named yet because they don't have too much of it, but this thing was only as big as a small sheep. There are also other dwarfed ornithischians, and again, sort of sheep-goat sized. Interesting group. There is a very distinctive mammal here, Ostribosphenops, which is only a few centimeters long. So really think about a mouse-sized thing, but a spineless hedgehog. And when I say they're placental mammal, I mean a mammal like you and I. So not a marsupial, which are the common mammals of Australia. Then this one, I won't even try to pronounce it here, but a Hypsilophodont. Remember, this is one of the unique ornithischians. But this is one of these ones that's found here as well, primitive ornithopod, and you can see the relative size here in this cartoon between it and a human being. It might have reached your knees, and that's it. So again, recall the very high latitude location for this, which should say that these animals should be bigger. Because if you go by this thing called Bergmann's rule, it's a biogeographic rule, it says that the size of organisms, their sheer biomass, increases with increasing latitude. Deer in Texas are not as big as deer in Wisconsin. It's just a simple fact like that. And then this, as you see from this cartoon here, this even holds for human examples. Humans that live in predominantly colder climates, northern Sweden, Finland, Norway, versus African climates have very different body masses. This Bergmann's rule, it's kind of universal. It holds for organisms on land, in the water, in the oceans, whatever, and throughout time. And so it should hold for dinosaurs as well, that the closer they are to the pole, the bigger they should be, but they are not. A little bit more with Bergmann's rule, why this is always true is that you are maximizing the volume while minimizing the surface area. And when you do that, you retain heat, which is a necessity in these ultra high latitudes. But there's another factor going on here. There's another thing called the island rule. And in the island rule, Large animals that live on a continent, a mainland, when they are isolated on a small island or a smaller chunk of land, they get small because what's happening is they evolve to adapt to the amount of resources that are available. And then by contrast, you have some little things that when they're small in the mainland because they're competing with all these big things, if they are found on smaller islands and they don't have those same big competitors there, they will be found large. But we're looking more at this phenomenon here, that organisms on the mainland are large and in a small part smaller. Now, it's not an island. Dinosaur Cove, we are pretty certain it was like a small peninsula, sort of a sticking out, jutting finger of land. And the thought is that peninsulas also, again, the thought of that is that this sort of area of Dinosaur Cove was a peninsula, and so dwarfing could occur there as well. Now, the most abundant organism there is this one that I can't pronounce, and so there's plenty of evidence there where we can look at it, the populations, and say, well, how did it deal with the cold, the length of the night? If we look at it and then Tamimus and some of these other ones, it has, well, it has very prominent growth lines in here. And that is taken to show that there's a severe slowing during this prolonged night when they're trying to survive this high latitude winters. By contrast, this Laelinasaura, I'll give it a shot, the Hypsilophodont does not have those prominent growth lines. Remember, those growth lines in bone histology were evidence of ectothermy or cold-bloodedness. Well, this organism does not have it. And so clearly it was active and, on the prowl all the time, even during the long, long dark season and the cold winters there. If we look at Hypsilophodontids in general, they're characterized by their very huge eye orbits, and if we looked at their brain cases, they'd have prominent lobes for their optical nerve endings. So this gives us an idea that they had some type of enhanced vision in the dark. Interesting thing. So then here's a picture of one of the brain cases, enlarged optic lobes. And so these things were probably still active even in these freezing or sub-freezing temperatures. Now the Cretaceous was definitely much warmer than today, but still, if you are at that high of a latitude above the Arctic or Antarctic Circle, you're going to be in freezing or sub-freezing temperatures, and you're certainly going to be dealing with the darkness. There we go. So is it sort of an artificial winter? Can these things be active in dark and cold? Can they thermoregulate? How would they deal then with the artificial winter that would happen after an asteroid kills most of the things on planet Earth? Interesting thought. So what this says is that, well, what was taken to be one of the major killing mechanisms for dinosaurs after the asteroid hits, which we'll definitely talk about a couple lectures from now, is probably not the case for all dinosaurs, certainly not these polar ones.